I'm taking a backpack full of mystery games to trade at RetroFest Arkansas. I've got a ton of awesome, amazing games in this bag. So let's go ahead and head out and see if we can trade them for some games I don't already have. So I took my backpack full of games to trade into RetroFest Arkansas, day 2 here, and I made my way to Eric Merz booth. He is the guy who puts on the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy, and I thought this would be a perfect place to start this video off. I told him to grab into the bag and see what he could get, and he felt around for a little bit and ended up pulling Zelda Ocarina of Time, which is a perfect game to start this video off with. So he went ahead and pulled that out, and then we kind of started wandering around his booth in search of something awesome that was worth trading for. He looked around for a little bit, and then he ended up pulling Mr. Driller for the PlayStation complete in the box. We ended up making that deal, and honestly, I had made my way through his booth the first day, and actually ended up seeing Mr. Driller, so when he pulled it out, I was like, even better. This game looked interesting, and I really don't know anything about it, but it looks like a game that I will definitely have fun playing on my PlayStation 1. This looks like a game that's going to be absolutely awesome. So I'm really glad I made that first trade, but we've got a ton more, so stick around to the end. But let's go back to the con. Then I made my way over to Charlie's Retro Reality and hit up Jason. We'd already talked a few times. I made my way to his booth the first day, but I said, hey, do you want to make a trade? I got a bunch of games here in this bag, but you gotta do it mystery style. So he went ahead and grabbed it, and we were kind of making jokes here and there, and then he started feeling around to see kind of what he wanted to pull out of my bag, and that is when he actually pulled out Legend of Dragoon for the PlayStation 1. We talked a little bit, and he said this is actually a game he wanted for his personal collection, and I said it is a greatest hits, but still. And he was very, very happy. He said even better because that means it'll probably stay in his collection, which I am definitely glad to hear. We talked a little bit, wandered through his booth a little bit, trying to see what we could trade for. Like I said, we had talked the day before about the WonderSwan color that he had in his booth, and then he made a really funny joke and was like, well, we could go crazy and try to trade for this. And I was like, no, we can't do anything like that. We got to keep this fair. So I was like, I can't take the WonderSwan, but thank you so much. That is so awesome. But then he kind of wandered around to this corner over here, and he pulled out not one, but 2 GameCube games. And that is when he pulled out Pikmin 1 and 2 for the GameCube. And I was like, are you sure you want to do that? And he was like, this is a game I really want for my collection. So we ultimately ended up trading for 2 copies. Well, I guess a copy of Pikmin and a copy of Pikmin 2 for the GameCube. Now, these are just the disc and the artwork and the case, but honestly, I think he did me a solid here. I haven't looked up any of these prices, and I don't like to look up prices when we do these things just because it's for fun, and I want to trade and get rid of some duplicate games and have some fun, which is the whole purpose of these videos. So he said, yeah, both of them are missing manuals, so let's do the trade. And I was like, if that's what you want to do, I'll do it. But he definitely hooked me up with these 2 games. I don't believe I have Pikmin 2 on the GameCube, so even better there. Definitely well worth picking up or trading, because that Legend of the Dragoon that I actually had was a duplicate and was my original copy until I got the black box. And so I'm super happy that he got that game. I hope he enjoys it, because I'll definitely enjoy keeping these in my collection. But we gotta head back out there. There's still more trades to be done. So then I headed over to the Goblin Hut video games booth. This guy's local to me, so I was like, hey, I gotta do the deal with you. And so we've actually done a trade like this sort of before, but the funny thing is, we were talking and he actually pulled a game that we had previously traded before. So keep an eye out for that video. But once he did that, I was like, okay, this is funny, because I forgot that I had 2 copies of that. And so you see me grab Zelda Ocarina of Time here out because I knew I had 2 copies of that as well. And I said, how about this? I'll let you decide. Do you want to keep the Pokemon Snap that you grabbed, or do you want to grab this Nintendo 64 game that I just pulled? And he said, let's take the risk here. I don't know what this is. So he ended up with Zelda Ocarina of Time. So right off the bat here, I traded away both copies, which is absolutely funny to me. We kind of talked back and forth. We kind of were wandering through his booth trying to see what we could trade for. And he said, I had a ton of other stuff yesterday, but he had sold through a bunch, which was totally awesome. And I was like, all right, what do you think you want to trade for? And he said, how about I pick 2 games and then you have to pick left or right hand? And I was like, shoot, let's do it. So he went ahead and grabbed both of the games and hid them behind his back. And then I ended up picking the one on his right, which was my left. And that's when he pulled out a copy of Final Fantasy 4 on the Nintendo DS, which is definitely well worth it. So I ended up getting another DS game, which I've got a video in the works about the Nintendo DS, so this was even cooler to pick up and trade for. But honestly, I thought it was really funny that the one game that I had 2 copies of, we basically traded. So I was like, let's do a redo, and I gave him the chance, and he picked it, which I figured he would, and he picked the better game, to be honest. I'm not mad about it, but to trade that for this is definitely awesome. This is complete, which is great to see. So when I ended up seeing the grabbed Pokemon Snap, I kind of chuckled a little bit because I wasn't expecting it, but then we made up for it in the trade. So I'm definitely glad I ended up getting this, but it's time to keep trading, so let's go back out there. So then I ended up heading over to the Register Retro booth, which was totally awesome. I saw him earlier in the day and yesterday, so I figured I'd come out and hit him up and ask him what he wanted to trade for. And he pulled out Wii Sports Resort, which was a complete in-box copy, which was absolutely awesome. He was actually stoked for it because he actually wanted it for his collection, which makes this even better. This is the 2nd time today, which is absolutely wild that this keeps happening, but I'm definitely stoked. And I was like, all right, what do you want to trade for? And he kind of wandered around in his booth, looked left and right, trying to find what game he wanted from his table. And that's where he leaned over and grabbed this Nintendo DS game. Yeah, it keeps happening, and I'm not upset about it because he ended up grabbing Zelda and the Phantom Hourglass, and we ended up talking and making that deal, which is absolutely awesome. Like I said, I'm working on another DS video and they're just falling into my lap. Now, I'm definitely happy about this. It was a great trade. I'm glad that I stopped here and said, hey, do you want to trade? And he pulled out a game that he wanted for his own collection, which I know it's not a rare game, but not everyone has all the games in their collection. So I'm so glad he pulled out. He was excited. He's going to play it. And so this was a perfect trade. And I even got Zelda Phantom Hourglass complete. So I'm definitely happy there. So let's head back to the convention and see what else we can find. So then I continued on and I headed over to the Repair to Play booth where we've done deals before, we've traded before, so I knew this was a perfect place to head over and do this deal. And that's when I was like, what do you want to trade for? And he was like, I don't know. So I was like, go ahead, reach into the bag. There's a bunch of bangers in here, so feel around if you want to. See if there's anything good you have to have or anything that's calling out to you. And that's when he ended up pulling Kirby's Adventure for the NES, which is an awesome game. And then he started looking around through his booth, and then right away went to the Game Boy Color section and handed me Rayman 2. Now, I was like, I don't know, this is a little too expensive. And he was like, no, I've had that game for way too long. And I was like, all right, cool. So ultimately, I ended up trading Kirby's Adventure for the NES for Rayman 2 for the Game Boy Color, which honestly, I don't know too much about this game, so I'm definitely going to have to plop it into a Game Boy and test it out and play it a little bit. But obviously, this is a game that's not in my collection, and anytime I can find a game or trade for a game that I don't have in my collection, it's even better. Trading a game like Kirby's Adventure where I have duplicates of it for a game that I don't is always awesome. So shout out to him. We talked for a little bit. It was definitely awesome to see him. I hadn't seen him since the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy, so making this deal was even better. So I'm definitely glad we did this. But let's go back to the convention. It's time. Then I made my way over to Big Money Bowman's booth where he had a bunch of VHS. We talked a little bit, and then I was like, hey, do you want to do a trade? And he's like, what do you got? And so I pulled out the mystery bag full of bangers, and that is when he ended up pulling out Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo. Definitely a game that will go great in his antique booth. So I was happy about that. Finding games that these guys can trade are always awesome. So we made our way over to his booth where we kind of wandered, looked around a little bit to see what we could find. And that's when he kind of smirked and looked at me and said, what do you think about a sealed game? And then pulled out ESPN Sunday Night NFL, which I think is pretty funny. I don't have too many sealed games in my collection, so I was down to do that trade. I see Super Mario World all the time, and like I said, this was a duplicate. We ended up talking a little bit about his store that he had and his flea market booth and all that, so it was definitely good to see him and catch up. But honestly, I don't see too many sealed games, especially not sealed Super Nintendo games in my area, so I know this is just a sports game, but I think this is kind of awesome to trade for. Like I said, we all know that Super Mario World is an amazing game, and there's a million copies of that. So trading that for a completely sealed game is just pretty awesome. And it even came with the protective case. So I think this trade was an interesting one, but still definitely worth it for me and for him. So I'm definitely glad we made this trade. So then I made my way over to Woodman Classics booth where he had a ton of awesome stuff, and I gave him the rundown and said, hey, there's a bunch of bangers in this bag. Pull one out and see if you want to trade for it. So he dug around and ended up pulling out an awesome game, which you saw earlier in the video, being Pokemon Snap for the Nintendo 64. So we looked around his booth a little bit, and right off the bat, he knew what he wanted to trade for. And that ended up being a Sega Genesis game. You might know it called Golden Axe, which is absolutely awesome. We ended up completing the trade, shaking on it, and then after that, we talked for a while, to be honest with you, about his channel and all the cool stuff that he does. Absolutely awesome talking to him, and I'm glad we ended up getting a trade for this video. So, I ended up finding that Pokemon Snap a while ago and trading for it, I think. So, even better, getting Golden Axe for the Sega Genesis. I think this might be a better copy than the one I already have, so that's even better. I can put this in my collection and then trade off that one when it comes to time. But this was definitely awesome. But it was definitely great to talk to Woodman while I was there. Then I headed over to the Arkansas picker booth and caught him off guard while he was putting stuff away and was like, hey, I got some more trades to do, but don't look in the bag. I've got a ton of stuff. He's like, all right, cool. So he reaches in his hand and wanders around in this bag to see what he could get. He kind of felt some things and was like, okay, I know what this is. I know what this is. He kind of rummaged around and probably did a lot of damage, but it's okay there. And that's when he pulled out Doom for the Super Nintendo, and we ended up talking, and he was definitely interested in trading for this. So I was like, all right, cool. And he was like, what do you want to trade for? And I said, you're picking. And he was like, oh, that again? Okay. So he started looking around in his booth for some awesome stuff. He had a ton of stuff. He leaned over to the PS4 section and tried to hand me like the cheapest game ever. And then was like, nah, I'm just kidding with you. And he went over to the glass case. And that's when he pulled out Sonic Heroes for the Nintendo GameCube, and even while we were doing the deal, he even showcased it off for us, which was even funnier. So I'm glad that I stopped by his booth. We talked a little bit. He shook it around and was like, this isn't a maraca or anything like that. And I was like, no, it has some label damage, but other than that, the game works great. So that is how I ended up getting Sonic Heroes for the GameCube. This is a game that is absolutely awesome, and it is complete, which is even better. I don't remember if I have the player's choice version. Sometimes I like to keep both, but don't tell everyone, please. And so this is definitely going to stay in my collection. A great trade. That Doom I have had forever, and I have 2 copies of it, so I figured it's time to trade that up for something else, and I don't think I have this, which is even better for me. Shout out to Brandon from Arkansas Picker for making the trade as well. So I'm definitely glad this is coming in my collection. And right next to his booth was the Retro Wolf booth. So I was like, all right, we're doing another trade right off the bat here. I wandered over, told him about everything in the bag and all that jazz. And that's when he dug into my backpack. And lo and behold, for the 3rd time in this video, he pulled out something that he's actually wanted and actually needed, being Metroid Samus Returns on the Nintendo 3DS. I have 2 or 3 copies of this, so I threw it in my backpack to trade, and I was like, make sure everything's in there. It should be complete. And then we realized, oh, this is the digital one anyways, so there's not an actual manual in it, so technically it is complete. And then he kind of looked through his booth a little bit to see what we could end up doing the trade for, and that is when he ended up pulling out this complete in-box, yeah, I said complete in-box, Mickey Mouse Capade for the NES, which is an absolutely awesome thing. And when he presented it to me, I posed the question, do you know about the Mickey head that's actually on the board of this game? And so he was like, what? So I got to bestow Retro Wolf with some weird information that no one really cares about, but is an interesting fact. And that is the fact that if you open up this game and you look at the board itself, it actually has a Mickey on it, which is pretty interesting and pretty cool. So we ended up putting it back together and making that deal, which is absolutely awesome. And honestly, I do not have this game in my collection boxed or complete in box. I just have the loose cartridge, so adding this to my collection and trading a game that I already had is even better. So shout out to Retro Wolf for that. And also, I hope he gets to use that information about the Mickey head on the cartridge or on the board of the game, that useless fact, sometime in the future. But honestly, this is just one of those games that's totally awesome. If you've got an NES, you gotta play this one. I definitely enjoy it, so I'm glad to be able to add this to my collection and make a good trade. That left me with 1 trade left, and that is when I went over to the RadJunk booth and talked to Sam and Joe. Absolutely awesome people. We also shot this portion in their video as well. So if you do not follow their channel, you've got to go check it out. They are absolutely awesome. And I basically was like, hey, do you want to do this? And they're like, yeah, are you cool with us filming it? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we ended up talking a little bit here before we did anything. And after, I'll be honest with you. So we ended up talking. Sam ended up grabbing a game. She felt around and tried to guess what games were. And I tricked her a little bit with a Sega 32X game. She thought it was a Sega Genesis game. But then ultimately, she found the NES game that was in here, which is an absolutely awesome game. And that is when she pulled out the gold cartridge Zelda NES game, which is absolutely awesome. Perfect trade for them. That will do really well in their store. So we went ahead and went to the other side of their booth where a bunch more games were, to be honest, because we were on the more expensive game side. So we ended up looking through here. She looked through the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64. She looked all around her booth, and then Tyler, the Arkansas Picker, interrupted us, but enough about that. We got back to our trade after we were rudely interrupted, and that is when Sam kind of looked down at the Super Nintendo games, looked back over at Joe, and they knew what was happening. And that is when she ended up grabbing Spanky's Quest for the Super Nintendo, which I don't have in my collection, which is pretty awesome. I talked to Joe about it a little bit afterwards. He was telling me kind of what the game was about, and honestly, this looks like a game that I'll definitely enjoy. So we ended up talking a little bit, and then we ultimately made the deal, which was absolutely awesome. And again, here we are getting games I don't have in my collection, which I absolutely love. And that's kind of why I do these, because it's fun. We all get to have some fun. Shout out to RadJunk. If you didn't notice, you should check their channel out. But this was definitely awesome. Again, I have a few copies of the gold cartridge, Zelda for the NES, so I figured perfect to throw it in my backpack. They pulled it out and then gave me an awesome game that I don't have in my collection called Spanky's Quest. And this sounds like it's going to be a weird one, which is right up my alley. So I'm definitely glad we made this trade. It was definitely well worth it to me. So there you go. I ended up doing a bunch of awesome trades with all of these awesome people. Anytime I can spend some time and talk to these people, it's absolutely awesome. And I'm really glad that I got to. So shout out to all of them. Down below in the description, there's links to all of their stuff, so if you want to follow them, you definitely should. There's YouTube, there's Instagram, there's a ton of stuff, so go follow all of them if you are interested at all, but definitely well worth the trading because most of these games I don't have in my collection or I got better copies. So I'm definitely glad and definitely thankful for everyone for doing these deals. I like to keep around a bunch of duplicates and then I put them in a box, and then when it comes time, I put them in my bag and I get to trade with people. So it's definitely awesome. So shout out to everyone that did the deals with me. But if you think I missed some people I should have done deals with, comment down below and let me know. RetroFest Arkansas was absolutely awesome. Shout out to Retro Rick. He puts this thing on. This is the second year. And again, it was absolutely awesome, and I'm really glad that I was invited. So shout out to him as well. But enough about that trading stuff. I got to get out of here because there's a bunch of games that I just got. So check that video out if you haven't already. But honestly, I'm not sure which one of these games I think was the best trade. But either way, I'm happy for all of these games. I'm happy to add all of these to my collection, but comment down below and let me know what you think was the best game. But I gotta get out of here, so check that video out if you haven't already.